Hello. Today I'd like to continue on the topic of tic-tac-toe, and so this is the second video. And last time I said that I would prove that the 8 in a row tic-tac-toe on an infinite board is a draw, but actually I'll do that in the next video, as I need to touch on a topic that I forgot to mention in the first video, but that is essential going forward. So this is the distinction between the maker-maker version of the game and the maker-breaker version of the game. So what are these two versions? So maker-maker is the version that we usually use. So maker-maker, which I'll write MM. So the objective of both players is to place to write on k squares in a row. So for instance, to put 3 crosses or 3 circles or whatever. Okay. While the maker-breaker version of the game is different, because player 1's objective, the player who plays first, is still the same, so to make k in a row, but player 2's objective is different. It's just going to be to stop player 1 from making k in a row. So he's not actually trying himself to do k in a row. Okay, so basically the maker-maker game has 3 different possible outcomes. So player 1 win, player 2 win, and the draw. Even though we proved in the last video that with a simple argument we could actually show that player 2 can't win, so it's either a player 1 win or a draw. While the maker-breaker game has only 2 possible outcomes, so player 1 win and player 2 win. Okay, because we will say that if player 2 manages to always block player 1, then that's considered as a win for him, right? Even though in the usual sense we would say that it's a draw. But here we will say that it's a breaker win, and when player 1 wins, we will say that it's a maker win. In fact, we can also play, for instance, maker can also play as the second player and breaker as the first player. Okay, but in tic-tac-toe, we're only going to be looking at the case where maker is the first player and breaker is the second player, as that's what happens when you usually play. Okay, and we will see that showing results on this maker-breaker version is useful to deduce results on the maker-maker version, which is what people usually do when they're trying to prove results about tic-tac-toe. Okay, so first, let's see how these two formulations are, even though they seem similar, they're really not the same at all. So first let's illustrate this with a simple observation. Is that so the free, so remember we had talked about the MNK game, so the game where you're playing on an M by N rectangle and you're trying to do k in a row. So here it's the classic tic-tac-toe, okay, 3 by 3 board, 3 in a row. So the 3 by 3 game, so is a draw in maker-maker, but a maker win, so I'm going to write a M win, in maker-breaker. Okay, and why is this so? Well, when you draw your board, okay, so usually the first player wants to play in the center, so let's say the first player plays in the center. Here you probably know that the only good response for player 2 is to go in one of the corners. Okay, if player 2 goes here, player 1 is going to be able to win. If you want, I can shortly, like, player 1 goes here, then player 2 should be able to win by going here. Okay, and now player 1 can't do much because they have to block, and then player 2 goes here, and player 2 wins. Okay, because player 1 can't. Well, player 2 can't block here and here, and so player 1 wins. Okay, so player 2 has to play here to try and draw this game. And in this case, player 2 will be able to draw the game, right? You can just try playing this out. Player 2 will always manage. Okay, so for instance here or whatever. And the game is going to end in a draw. But notice that with player 1, you can play in a way which is reckless. Okay? You can play in a way that allows player 2 to win, except that, well, when we're playing in the make-or-breaker version of the game, well, you don't care about player 2 having 3 in a row. So player 1 can actually manage to, can actually always achieve 3 in a row if he allows player 2 to get 3 in a row. Thus, well, in the first game, player 1 would actually lose, but in this make-or-breaker version, well, it's actually breaker who loses because he hasn't managed to block maker. Okay, so basically, player breaker in the make-or-breaker version still has to play here. Otherwise, as we said, well, simply player 1 is going to win. But after this happens, okay, I'm not going to run through all the different variations, but basically, okay, so maker can continue by going, let's say here. Okay, he forces breaker to go here. Then maker goes here. And now, well, you can see that maker has managed to win the game because breaker can't block this square and this square at the same time. So, of course, well, here in the regular version, it's maker who would lose, well, player 1 who would lose because player 2 would go here and win. But in the maker-breaker version, well, after breaker goes here, maker goes here, and maker wins. So you can actually see that maker is, well, or player 1 is much stronger in the maker-breaker version than in the maker-maker version. Because in the maker-maker version, he has to worry about player 2 potentially achieving his own streak of K in a row. While in the maker-breaker version, he doesn't need to worry about that and can just focus on doing his own thing. So we can generalize this idea of player 1 being better off in the make-or-breaker version with some general results. Okay, so the results are, so let's write maker-breaker, well, maker-maker and maker-breaker. So let's look at all of the possible outcomes of the game. So we said that maker-maker is either a win, so intended a win for player 1, or it's a draw. Okay, well, in the case where maker-maker is a win, we said that since maker-maker is actually better off in the maker-breaker version, well, it's very easy to show that the maker-breaker version is a maker-win. Right? Because you basically just need to use the same strategy as in the maker-maker variation. It's really the same thing. You just need to worry about something less. And well, in the case of a draw, well, here we don't know, right? As we've seen in the maker-maker 3x3 version, of Tic-tac-toe, it was a draw, but in the maker-breaker, it was a maker-win. And of course, there are other instances where here it's a draw, and here it's a breaker-win. So you can't know. And conversely, we can say that for maker-breaker, if we have a breaker-win, Well, since this version is the worst case scenario for Breaker, because he can't have his own threats, he can only respond to Maker's threats, well then, this version will be a draw. Okay, this is exactly why in the last video, when we used that pairing strategy, we were only interested in blocking player one's moves. Because by doing that, well, we showed that for sufficiently large k, the k in a row game on an infinite grid was a Breaker win, and that implies directly that the Maker version is a draw. Okay? And in the case of a Maker win, well, we can't say anything once again. Both options, win and draw, are possible. Okay, so this is important because this really explains why we only focus on this Maker-Breaker version, and we can still deduce some results on the Maker-Maker version. Now, the second reason why people only really study, well, they don't only study the Maker-Breaker game, but it's the most popular, let's say, game of the two, is because there are some nice theorems that we haven't been able to prove on the Maker-Maker version. So these are theorems that are intuitively rather obvious, but they're actually very hard to prove in the Maker-Maker version, while they are quite trivial in the Maker-Breaker version. So, if the M and K game is a Breaker win, okay, then so M prime, N prime, K prime is always a Breaker win when you have, so M prime smaller than N, N prime smaller than N, and K prime greater than K. Okay, so this is basically just saying that if I take a finite board, a finite game for which Breaker wins, well then Breaker will still be able to win if we take a smaller board, right? Or, well, also if Maker has to make a longer streak to win. Showing this is really easy. It's basically just applying the same strategy, right? If you have a strategy that works for this game, it's also going to work for this game. And of course, you can just say that, well, if in this strategy you need to play somewhere that is not available anymore on this board because the board is smaller, well, then you can just play anywhere on this smaller board, and it will still work because you'll just be better off in the end. It's basically the same type of argument as the strategy stealing argument from last time. Okay, and there's a second result that is just analogous, right? It's the same thing. It's if M and K is a Maker win, then the same thing is a Maker win, this time if the board is larger. Okay, and the number of required squares in a row is smaller. So same thing, Maker can just use the same strategy as he uses on the smaller board. Right, and the thing is, these results of course are very useful, but even though it also seems like they should hold in the Maker-Maker version of the game, this is actually only a conjecture, right? It hasn't been shown, and it's really, really hard to prove. So this is a clear advantage, let's say, in the theoretical aspects of the Maker-Breaker game compared to the Maker-Maker game. Right? It's not obvious at all how you can show that these results hold in the Maker-Maker version. Right, and there's also a second point, which is about infinite boards, because here we've been only looking at finite boards. But these results, of course, well, they also generalize for infinite boards for the maker-breaker versions of the game. If the infinite version is a breaker-win, right, then basically this says that any finite version with a larger k prime will also be a breaker-win. Now, of course, here, this statement here hasn't much use because if we're taking some values that are larger than infinity, well, we're just taking an infinite board. But it just says that if maker wins on an infinite board, then he's also going to be able to achieve any shorter streak, which is rather obvious. But so the breaker version is quite useful because, for instance, since in the last video we said that for k smaller than 9, the maker-breaker tic-tac-toe on an infinite board is a draw. Well, thanks to this result, we also know that it's a draw for any finite board. Okay, and to come back on this thing, well, of course, I said that this was also true for k equals 8. But since we spent a bit of time on this topic and I don't want to make a very long video, I'll finally touch on this proof in the next video. And that's it for today.